Hello and welcome to another TLDR global video. It's fair to say that Antarctica is certainly like no other place on Earth, being a continent which has no countries in it. It also has a population of around 1,000 to 5,000 people, which, considering it's bigger than both the continent of Europe and Australia, makes it very sparsely populated. In fact, its population density is 0.0021 to 0.00104 inhabitants per square mile, depending on the time of year, which is very low when you consider the population density of Europe is around 87 people per square mile. Despite this lack of countries and relative lack of people, Antarctica does have a complex web of claims from other countries, something we'll get into in this video. But it has no government of its own. There's no Antarctic legal system, although there are a handful of laws that you have to follow if you visit that everyone is subject to, something we might cover in another video. But in this video, let's explain how Antarctica works. How does a continent with so few people, no countries, and a bunch of conflicting claims operate? Before we start, this is pretty much a brand new channel. This is only the second video we've put out. So if you haven't already, we'd love to see you subscribe. Doing so not only means that you'll get more global content from us, but it also helps us grow more quickly and reach a bigger audience. So do us both a favour, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Thanks so much for your support. So before we get to this complex web of Antarctic claims, let's go back through a very brief history of Antarctica, starting with the name. The ancient Greeks knew of the Arctic, which they named after the bear, Arctos. They hypothesized that there must be an opposite, an Antarctos, or opposite bear, to balance the world order. In the Middle Ages in Europe, a theoretical continent was hypothesized south of Australia, known as Terra Australis, Latin for South Land. The reason this continent was hypothesized about was because they hadn't actually observed any land yet. They only believed that the northern hemisphere had to be balanced out by a southern one, as in, there needed to be more land on the southern hemisphere that had yet to be discovered at that point. It wasn't until the 1800s that Antarctica was discovered, although it is controversial as to who exactly saw Antarctica first. It's generally accepted that it was first seen by an explorer in 1820. Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, an officer from the Russian Navy, Edward Bransfield, a British Royal Navy officer, and Nathaniel Palmer, an American captain, all claimed to see Antarctica for the first time in 1820, which seems suspicious considering they all supposedly saw it in the same year. But anyway. So we've made it to 1820 with the most brief history lesson known to man. This is where things in Antarctica start to get interesting, because nations begin claiming different parts of Antarctica for themselves. So let's get into that, because it is what we promised you in the title. Let's start with my own country's claim on Antarctica, Britain. Back in 1833, when Britain completely uncontroversially claimed the Falklands Islands for themselves, giving them a naval presence in the South Atlantic Ocean. And it's this claim where their Antarctic claims are founded. As with many British explorers, upon landing on the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica, Sir James Clark Ross named a bit of the land he found after Queen Victoria, naming it Victoria Land, which, if we're honest, sounds like a really terrible theme park. Although this did not remain a claim of the British going forward, and was transferred to the Australians in the 1930s. In 1908, Britain also claimed a bunch of islands near Antarctica, which they called things like the South Orkneys, the South Shetlands, and Graham's Island, presumably in a bid to make them sound like British islands, and thus bolster their claim. As a part of this, they established their Antarctic Wedge, not an official term, but it does sound appropriate. It's important to note here that this claim was reliant on the British rule of the Falkland Islands and its proximity to the British Antarctic Territory, which was part of the reasoning behind the claim. Essentially, we've got the Falklands, so we should also have this other nearby land. And it's incredible to see just how seriously the British take their claim. They have a full website dedicated to it, with this website even having a history section where they defend the claim, by arguing that the 1908 claim is the oldest claim on the continent, and that the UK has no doubt about its sovereignty over the British Antarctic Territory in the context of Article 4 of the Antarctic Treaty. The British Antarctic Territory even has its own commissioner and its own flag. You'll be happy to hear this flag does not only have a penguin on it, but a lion too. As part of this, the Commissioner can enact laws, which he has already done about a wide range of things, from marriage to drug laws. There's even a British Antarctic Territory Supreme Court, and a statute governing the police. The Commissioner, Ben Merrick, has even signed off on some official currency for the British Antarctic Territory. Although this is the exact same as the British currency, it features some designs unique to Antarctica. The best and most notable one is a 50p coin which features the head of Queen Elizabeth II on one side, complete with the words British Antarctic Territory 2018, and on the other side is, I quote, "an autonomous underwater vehicle Boaty McBoatface, submerged in Antarctic waters with the research ship RRS James Clark Ross, shown above among icebergs. Penguins can be seen swimming next to the vessel with further penguins shown on the iceberg. The value of the 50p is shown at the base." Wow, that is a long official description of a coin. The British make clear that it is indeed legal tender in the region. There are a number of other coins that can also be used in the region, including one that features some emperor penguins, which have the value of £2, £4 and £20. They seem to have been designed for collectors, but the licenses make clear that each such coin made in accordance with the conditions of the license shall be legal tender in the territory for their face value from the first date on which that coin was minted. Yes, the British really are taking their claim seriously. There are, however, two other national claims which actually overlap with the British territory, the first being the Argentinians. The Argentinians have had a near-constant human presence in their Antarctic region since 1904, and claim that this, coupled along with their proximity to Antarctica, makes their claim justified. They've also justified their claim by making the following arguments. Geographically, Antarctica is part of the Andes. Argentina makes a lot of rescue missions in Antarctica. Argentina has made many bits of navigational equipment in Antarctica, such as lighthouses. Argentina made Antarctica's first airport. The first baby to be born in Antarctica was from an Argentine mother. And Argentina has sent more people to Antarctica than any other country. The other country whose claim overlaps with the UK is Chile. Just for the sake of time, we won't go into as much detail in their claim, but it follows a similar line of argument as the other claims. Mainly that due to historical claims and legal declarations in the 1950s, they argue that their claim is legally legitimate. Oh, and they also have a dedicated flag for it, but it doesn't feature a penguin. Okay, let's move on to France, and their claim is a lot more basic. A French explorer, Jules de Mont d'Urville, landed in Antarctica in the 1840s and claimed the land for France, naming it after his wife. This land became known as the Adélie Land. Like the British, they have their own flag, but unfortunately this one doesn't include a penguin either. In addition to this, they even have a top-level domain, TF, for the French Antarctic lands. It should be noted though that this domain is mainly used for Team Fortress 2 websites, and it's a shame that it's not used for its intended purposes, for businesses and news sites dedicated to the French Antarctic territory, but maybe there's not that much demand in that space. But if you are thinking of setting up a YouTube channel that deals with the French Antarctic lands, then at least they have you covered when it comes to domain names. You may even be one of the first to use the domain as intended. Now let's move to Norway. In the late 1920s, the Norwegian whaling merchant Lars Christensen funded trips to Antarctica to claim land for Norway. On one trip, Peter Island was discovered, which is a small island in the South Antarctic Ocean, and they claimed it for Norway. Aeroplanes were used to discover more territory, specifically a region known as Queen Maud Land. This was a huge piece of land that was claimed by the Norwegians in 1939 via a royal decree. They tried to bolster this claim by making arguments about their historical expeditions in the region and their scientific contributions to it. The Norwegian claim does not have a flag and is therefore simply represented by the standard Norwegian flag. The area is governed by the Polar Affairs Department of the Norwegian Ministry of Justice and Public Security in Oslo. Only months after Norway made its claim on Queen Maud Land, Nazi Germany landed ships in the newly claimed territory and established an Antarctic base. They called their new region New Swabia, which was inside the Norwegian Queen Maud Land claim. This was mainly just because the Nazis needed whale oil to make margarine and didn't want to have to pay the Norwegians for it. This claim was subsequently given up by the Nazis when they surrendered in 1945. Unlike Norway though, the Nazis did have a flag for their Antarctic claim. The Australian claim is a lot more simple to explain. Britain discovered Victoria Land in the 1800s, as we explained, and then simply transferred it to Australia in 1933. This is now the largest claim on Antarctica by any region. It again doesn't have its own flag, and uses the Australian flag itself, and is governed by the Australian Antarctic Division, which works in the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. New Zealand has a very similar history to that of Australia. They had a territory transferred to them by Britain in 1923, but this is a much smaller claim than that of Australia. And again, they don't have their own flag for the region. So while these countries claim land in Antarctica, they're not the only ones trying to operate in the continent. As we'll explain in the next video, the Antarctic Treaty that governs how nations can act in the continent is set to come up for review in 2048. It's possible that at this point it could be scrapped entirely, or amended to allow countries to have official claims in the region. It's worth considering that history has shown the trend that the world is becoming more and more fixed in relation to territorial claims, and there are fewer and fewer disputed territories, as Antarctica is one of few remaining areas where there's a dispute. So it could be argued that it's inevitable that these disputes will be resolved when the review happens in 2048, but it's a little far off to worry about yet. Regardless, as a result of the impending review, powerful nations are attempting to stake their claim as they hope to get some extra territory when the Antarctic region is discussed again. One such nation is China, who throughout 2020 have steadily increased the number of bases and equipment they have there. If you want to know why they're doing that, you'll have to wait until the next video on this topic, I'm afraid. First rule of YouTube Video Club, always give the audience a reason to subscribe, and now you have one, get subscribing. One last thing, we talked about flags throughout this video, and if you're into that kind of thing, then you should cast a vote in our flag survey. We want you to have your say and help us decide what the best flag in the world is. You can click the link in the description, vote on a random selection of flags, and help us choose the world's best. The results will be shared right here on TLDR Global, so be sure to subscribe for the final results. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.